The other type is called the photodynamic therapy. In this, a substance called vetiporfin, which is a photosensitizing drug, is infused intravenously, and it will be binding to that neovascular tissue. And in the second step, you will be applying a low intensity non-thermal laser for a period of about 83 seconds, and that will activate the vetiporfin, and that will be killing all those new vessels which are forming. So that's the reason photodynamic therapy is having a role in the wet form of age-related macular degeneration is what need to be remembered. So this is the classical appearance of the neovascularization which is occurring in the wet form of the age-related macular degeneration before doing the photodynamic therapy, and after doing it you can see the hyper-intense area has minimized is what I want to underscore to all of you. You have one more way of managing, that's called the transpupillary thermotherapy, where a long pulse 8-10 nanometer infrared laser, it will be penetrating beneath the level of the retinal pigment epithelium, and it will be used to treat the ill-defined neovascularization which you can see in the wet type of age-related macular degeneration. So this gives the appearance of that CNV before the transpupillary therapy, transpupillary thermotherapy, and after that is what you can be able to see. Now let us come to our diabetes, which is waiting for us. Probably because I heard a lot of my wonderful students have answered it as proliferative diabetic retinopathy. But in the case of the proliferative diabetic retinopathy, it is the pan-retinal, not a focal treatment with a grid type of laser is what need to be remembered. Is a grid is given in the question frame? You know what is Anton syndrome? In them they will have visual agnosia. They will deny that they have a visual agnosia. So generally Anton syndrome will be happening after entrance. So we'll be thinking, probably that was not there in the question frame. So that is required because we need to survive until the results come, and after that also. So now let us talk about this diabetes, doctor. You have a diabetic macular edema. In this, you can basically use two procedures. One is called the focal laser and the other is called the grid photocoagulation. Focal laser is a common way that we use. Local areas of that leakage in the case of the diabetic retinopathy, in the case of the macular edema, in that they will be directly identified those aneurysms, and they are basically being taken care by this laser which will be cauterizing it and closing it. So yellow laser is the one that will be commonly used for this purpose is what need to be remembered. Now in the case of the diabetes, when they have a maculopathy of the diabetes, sometimes you may not find any vessel at all, you can't identify it. In that situation you use a grid photocoagulation. In that what you will be doing is, by doing the grid photocoagulation you will be changing the blood circulation in the retina and reduce the swelling is what need to be basically remembered. Now before we say goodbye to this topic, one of the favorite questions of the examiner, what are the different forms of the diabetic retinopathy basically? You have non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy, proliferative diabetic retinopathy, maculopathy is the broad division that had been given. What is this non-proliferative? You have mild and moderate to severe, two subdivisions in that. The microaneurysms, the dot blot hemorrhages, the hard exudates, they are all seen in the case of the mild type of non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy. Whereas all these above lesions, in addition to that, if cotton wool spots, venous beading, and the intraretinal microvascular abnormality is called IRMA. If it is appearing, it is called moderate to severe non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy. What do you mean by proliferative diabetic retinopathy? If there is any neovascularization, retinal detachment, if there is a vitreous hemorrhage, if there is a pre-retinal hemorrhage, all these things are called proliferative. Then very important type, third type, maculopathy we should never forget, it is more common type. So there is an entity called clinically significant macular edema, otherwise called CSME. And there is a type called ischemic maculopathy, and there is a type called focal exudative maculopathy. Macula is the central part of the retina. So these three things affect only the macula is what need to be basically remembered. If it is a focal exudative maculopathy, it responds very well if you use a focal argon laser photocoagulation. But if it is a diffuse edema type of maculopathy, it will be wonderfully responsive to the grid laser treatment. So what do you mean by clinically significant macular edema? In fact, if I ask you a question, what is the most common leading cause for the legal blindness in the cases of the diabetic retinopathy? It is not the proliferative or the non-proliferative type. It is the macular edema which is considered the most leading cause for the legal blindness in the diabetics is what need to be basically remembered. Here there is an edema because all the intercellular fluid is leaking from those microaneurysms, and that leads to the development of the edema. You will call it as a significant edema if it is of about 1 disc diameter or longer, and typically here the laser grid photocoagulation can be used. But macular edema is not given among the options. Macular ischemia is given. So please remember, doctor, this focal grid laser is considered the treatment of choice in the case of the maculopathy if it is of a macular edema nature. But if it is ischemic maculopathy, it is untreatable by any choice. So laser therapy cannot help it. So it can't be the answer. So there is a reason, doctor. Finally, the choices, but before that let us also conclude what to do with this proliferative diabetic retinopathy. Why does it happen? All the retinal ischemia lead to the development of the capillary proliferation, and that lead to development of neovascularization which extends into the retina, optic disc, and even into the iris called rubeosis iridis is something that should not be forgotten. In fact, the presence of the rubeosis iridis on clinical examination is a sign of a very severe form of the proliferative disease, and it can lead to an intractable glaucoma is one of the important complications. So here you can see, doctor, the new vessels are developing into the iris. So you can see the rubeosis iridis, and in the retina you can also see the presence of the neovascularization with a lot of microaneurysms. So this is a classical feature in the case of the neovascularization. Here what we use is not the grid photocoagulation, it is called a pan-retinal photocoagulation, where we will be applying laser burns of about 500 nanometers diameter, which are separated by about a burn width. So this is the final, at the end of pan-retinal photocoagulation, how it looks like is what I want to underscore to all of you. So there is a reason, doctor, out of the options given, grid laser is typically used in the case of the wet type of age-related macular degeneration is going to be a possible answer. Let's go to the next question. We are all living in the era of HIV. Without that, there is no question paper. HIV and retinitis, what are the important causative agents? Typically, doctor, you need to remember CMV leading to chorioretinitis is the most common type. Varicella zoster, pneumocystis carinii, Toxoplasma gondii, all these agents can lead to the development of the retinitis is what need to be remembered. Generally we think pneumocystis carinii means lung infection. Can it cause retina? Definitely it even can cause the retinitis. CMV retinitis, the most common form, looks like this on fundoscopy. There will be areas of infarction, hemorrhage, perivascular sheathing, retinal opacification. All these are the important features of the CMV retinitis is what I want to underscore to all of you. Even herpes simplex also is known to cause. Human papilloma, I could not get a reference. It can't cause, is by exclusion we can consider. Let's go to the next question. Ipsilateral antagonist to the right lateral rectus muscle is which muscle? Actually, examiner wanted to make it a little tougher, but could not do that. He would have asked, which is the yoke muscle to the right medial rectus? That would have been the toughest question. But this is a very simple question. That is, which is the antagonist to the ipsilateral, antagonist to the right lateral rectus? First of all, we need to know definition of two things. What is an agonist, what is a synergist, what is an antagonist, and what is a yoke muscle basically? I'll take 2 minutes of your time. The primary muscle that moves the eye in a given direction is basically called the agonist. The muscle in the same eye that moves the eye in the same direction as that of the agonist is called the synergist. In the same eye, the muscle that moves in the opposite direction to that of the action of this primary muscle is called the antagonist, is what need to be basically remembered. For example, in the right eye, the abduction of the right eye, the right lateral rectus muscle is considered to be the agonist. Now, which are the other muscles, while they are acting, they also lead to development of the abduction and can act like the synergists. And which are the other muscles, while they are acting, they can lead to adduction and act as an antagonist in the same eye. So, the right superior and the inferior oblique, what is the function of the right superior rectus? Right superior rectus elevates, and inferior oblique will cause also elevation. But while they are doing so, their secondary action is to also cause abduction. Hence they act like the synergists. And the right medial The right superior and the inferior rectus, they're all considered to be the antagonists in the same eye, is what I want to underscore to all of you. There's one law called Sherrington's law, all of you know very well. What does it state, doctor? Any increased innervation to any of these agonists is associated with a concomitant decrease in the innervation of the antagonist. Only when the antagonist, that is if I am looking laterally, in the same eye my medial rectus must become silent. So it is only possible by this Sherrington's law which says, if my right lateral rectus is functioning, my right medial rectus automatically need to become denervated and switched off. Is called the Sherrington's law, is what need to be remembered. What is a yoke muscle basically? What is a yoke, doctor? If you look at a bullock cart, two buffaloes will be there. There will be a yoke which will help both of them to coordinate and make them to move. Okay? So, yoke muscles are the primary muscles of each eye that accomplish a given version. What do you mean by this? For example, for the right gaze, my right lateral rectus and my left medial rectus will be acting like the yoke muscles for me to look towards my right side, is what need to be basically remembered. So each extraocular muscle has got a yoke muscle not in the same eye, in the opposite eye, and it will be accomplishing the version in order to achieve that particular gaze position, is what I want to underscore to all of you. Sherrington law is for the same eye's agonist-antagonistic muscles. You have another law called Herring's law, which states that whenever I am looking towards my right side, if the innervation is going towards my right lateral rectus, equal amount of innervation, not denervation, must go to my left medial rectus, is called basically the Herring's law, is what I want to underscore to all of you. And because the innervation to the yoke muscles will be determined by the fixing eye, there is something called angle of deviation which will occur if there is any paralysis of these muscles. So there is one primary angle of deviation, secondary angle of deviation. Similarly, strabismus can be congenital and acquired. One of the favorite question of examiner is, in which type of strabismus primary angle is more than that of secondary angle and secondary angle more than that of the primary angle. So after you understood what is a yoke muscle and what is meant by the agonist and synergistic, it is very easy to answer this another important question, which is a potential question tomorrow. The angle of the deviation between the two eyes will be depends on the eye which is fixing. Suppose you have one paralyzed eye and one normal eye. If the normal eye is fixing, then the deviation which is created is basically called as the primary deviation. Whereas if it is the paretic eye, if it is fixing, then the deviation is basically called secondary deviation. So typically in the case of the congenital strabismus, primary and secondary deviations are typically about the same value. Whereas in the case of the acquired paralysis, secondary deviation, that is the deviation created when the paretic eye is fixating a particular object, then secondary deviation which occurs will be typically larger than that of the primary deviation, is what I want to underscore. There's a lot of gas in this. Finally, you need to remember, doctor, for your exam, that right lateral rectus, ipsilateral antagonist will be the right medial rectus. Anyway, all of you have answered. If it would have been what is the yoke muscle, then a little amount of pathetic situation would have been there.